For more on these latest tensions, I spoke earlier with two guests, James Jatras, Deputy Director of the American Institute in Ukraine, and Kurt Volker. He's a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. He's now Executive Director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University.
If you look at what happened since the end of the Cold War, you had countries that have been occupied by the Soviet Union become free, independent, want to be secure. They all joined NATO because they wanted to feel secure and not have to deal with Russian aggression or occupation again. And frankly, that was very successful. So you have 100 million people who now live in free societies that are secure. NATO, because there wasn't any Russian threat during this time, dramatically reduced its defense capabilities, its defense spending. Every defense secretary that I can remember has been complaining about the decline in NATO defense capabilities and defense spending. Russia, meantime, has built itself back up. It's invaded a couple of its neighbors. It's annexed Crimea. It's exercised in very large numbers just east of NATO territory. It's buzzed our warships. It's violated people's airspace. So NATO, as a result of this, is saying, well, we're going to have to put a little bit more in place so that our commitment to collective defense, should it ever be tested, is known to be real.
Jim?
Well, I would not say it was a success expanding NATO up to Russia's borders. If you look at how does this enhance U.S. security, I don't think it does at all. I think it endangers American security to be handing out war guarantees like they were making Facebook friends. This notion that somehow the Russians are aggressive for moving troops around within their own borders, that the Russians are aggressive because, they've moved their borders up to our NATO allies. I think we have behaved very provocatively at the end of the Cold War when Russia, I think, reasonably expected with the end of communism, we were all going to be friends, and then they see what happened not only with the expansion of NATO, but with the NATO war against Yugoslavia, which I know from many people I talked to in Russia had been violently pro-American before that, and then they said, now we see what you're really about, that all the things the Soviet Union said about you, which we thought were lies then, were true.
Russia moving its troops around into other people's countries and annexing them and occupying them, that's not normal stuff. That's not within their own territory. And in terms of what we're talking about with Central and Eastern Europe, these are independent countries. These are people who are making their own choices about their own countries. It's not some kind of aggression towards Russia. So I think Russia is using that as a pretext for its own ambitions, not that there's anything that has happened to Russia at all.
This escalation, when do we reach a tipping point, or is this just posturing?
Russia is testing new things. So what if we do this? What if we do this? I think when we do see a bit more pushback, and we're starting to see that now with the NATO deciding to put battalions in each of the Baltic states, for instance, to say that we are going to defend the territory of our allies at least. We're not going to defend Ukraine, but we will for those countries that are members of NATO and our allies who will defend their territory if anything should happen to them. Then I think we're going to start seeing some balance back into this and maybe a little bit more stability. But until the Russians feel that kind of pushback, I think they're going to keep testing.
Jim, I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, I think this is more of a, with all due respect to the ambassador, more simply let's poke the bear and see if we can get a response from him. I don't think it makes any sense. I don't think it adds to the security of our country. And by the way, I would put the U.S. posture in the South China Sea with respect to China in exactly the same terms. My hope is, and I was very inspired by Donald Trump's speech the other day, where he said, look, we're going to reach out to the hand of partnership to both Russia and China and see what can be done where our mutual interests coincide. I think it's time to get over this kind of bipartisan, neocon Republican, liberal interventionist, democratic foreign policy that is based on the concept that the United States needs to be the dominant power on every corner of the globe and start respecting other territories in their neighborhood the way we would expect them to respect us here in our hemisphere.
A former Assistant Defense Secretary for Obama said recently, when you look at the military exercises, the maritime exercises planned by NATO, it's sending a pretty clear message to Moscow. What do you see that message as?
I think there's a mixed signal that we send. On the one hand, we act and talk very provocatively in terms of stepping on Russia's, I would say also China's toes in their own territory, but then that is then backed up with an obvious weakness and flaccidity when it comes to, well, what are you going to do about it?
It's not a clear message for the very same reason that you say. We'll put a destroyer not into Russian territory or Chinese territory, into international waters. And the Russians will then buzz that and we don't do anything.
We had agreed in the Russia-NATO Founding Act we would not base NATO forces in the new members east of Germany,
not
and
what it
now we're
says.
playing little games by, oh, we're not basing them there, we're just rotating them through, and we want to spend, what, another $500 billion beefing up these forces over there to counter what threat to the United States and to the American people? Zero.
You look at what NATO was founded for. It's Article 4 of the NATO Treaty says it will defend the territory of its members against an attack, and we put together a capability to be able to defend. Fortunately, we never had to do that. As countries in Europe that had been occupied by the Soviet Union became free, they wanted to be part of that community too, so they didn't have to worry about their security being taken away from them again.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.